Friday Eve.
Joining us now on the program, Tommy Pigott. He's the Rapid Response Director for the Republican National Committee. Thanks for joining us this morning, Tommy.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Big day yesterday. I think I caught a report that suggested this was the longest presidential press conference in history. Is that your understanding as well? Have you seen that report?
I've seen it, but I don't know if you remember Jen Psaki saying that Joe Biden taking questions is not something they recommend. If that longest press conference in history showed anything, that was good advice. So maybe next time they'll follow it.
And I didn't actually parse it out that way, but just looking at the published text from the conference yesterday, which the White House is always customarily does right after the president conducts such an address. It does look like it's primarily consists of reporter questions. Maybe the most and answers, his responses, of course, maybe the most in his history of his 1 year being in office. The actual remarks themselves appear to be about a third of the total time, and 2/3 of that nearly 2-hour catastrophe was consumed with questions and Q&A from reporters, the first half of which was totally scripted and orchestrated, choreographed, as Rhino said. And he was reading some of the responses. I mean, it's like the questions were planted and the responses were planned, and he had those in writing in front of us, and he would bow his head over and read the responses to the questions. It was just bizarre. I mean, your thoughts. I know you've dug into this and analyzed it. What do you think?
Well, I think the word bizarre is almost a kind word for it. If they were expecting these questions, if these responses were planned, then I expect that they go back to the drawing board, because that was a complete disaster. It would be laughable if it wasn't so concerning for the American people.
Right.
On
That's
issue
right.
after issue, he was asked questions on Afghanistan, on inflation, on his policies, where he just responded either with nonsense, unintelligible speak and gibberish, or with lies. Those were his two responses. So if they really plan those responses, he either needs to get new staff or they need to rethink how they're planning those answers.
It was honestly, some of it was creepy and it was cringeworthy, especially those points primarily during the Q&A period where he would just pause for a long period of time. I mean, to the point where I wondered if I had lost the connection on my television. Did something die here? I had to check the control to make sure we were still live and still active. That was just weird.
I mean, it's possible he was lost in thought. I mean, I would recommend to him that maybe he think a little bit more next time, because he still stepped in it a fair number of times. But I think what also it showed was that he really has no answer to his failures. I mean, he's created all these crises. Afghanistan was something that he created. Inflation is something he created. The border crisis is something he created. So, he doesn't have answers to the crises that he's made, because if he were to answer them and he were to answer honestly about the next steps we should take, he'd say, I should reverse every single thing I've done in my first year in office. And I think, you were talking about this before, about how, he gives himself high marks, he says he outperformed. Well, newsflash for Joe Biden, only 33% of the American people approve of his time in office, which is the lowest any president has had at this point in their presidency in the history of Quinnipiac polling. So if he thinks that's outperformed, I'm not really sure where he's placing the bar for himself, because he really can't get much worse.
Yeah, we just read his quote when he was asked the question, did you overpromise? And he said, no, actually, I think I outperformed expectations, or something to that effect. And I mean, that may be in his mind, and that may be his personal self-assessment, but I don't think that aligns with that of the American people. Certainly not with respect to polls. The one you referenced, the Quinnipiac poll, shows him at 33%, I think, approval. I'm not sure another president has ever had such a rating, certainly after 1 year.
Definitely not at this point in their presidency. This is the lowest any president's had at this point in their presidency with Quinnipiac.
Quite the
I think
distinction.
To another point that you were saying, he was talking about, taking these long pauses, et cetera. And there is this impression with the American public that he's not competent, which I think is fair if you just look at the results of his policies. And what kind of struck me is, imagine being in Washington, D.C. for 50 years. only thing you've ever done in your entire life is be in government. And the American people say you're not good at it. That's Joe Biden in a nutshell. The only thing he has ever done is government. And he's not good at it.
Yeah.
So, it's one disaster after another. And that's why he has that 33% approval rating.
Yeah. I mean, I know it's customary when a president has their time and they're at the podium and they're speaking to the nation. Of course, it's customary to tout their accomplishments and to try to call attention to that which they've done that has been positive and successful. And he attempted to do that yesterday, but all of it is a stretch at best. Some of it's just flat out a lie, honestly. And once again, dwelling on COVID and its performance there, the results themselves, the fact that we've got record cases in the last couple of weeks, and we've got other issues going on in the country as well that are causing problems as a result of COVID. I saw where 8.8 million people called in sick over the last 2 weeks. I'm hearing lots of employers talk about the difficulties of just operating their businesses because folks are calling in sick, and they're legitimately sick, but they get infected, and thank God most of the accounts I've heard are not serious disease, but the guy said he was going to shut it down. That's the bottom line, and to a great extent, he kind of rode that campaign promise into office, but he hadn't succeeded there.
I think that's an important point. Joe Biden's campaign, his fundamental promise was built on a lie, that he'd be able to get in there, flip a switch, and shut down the virus. He didn't just say it once. He didn't just say it twice. He said it again and again and again and again. And he was handed vaccines. He was handed a testing capacity. He was handed treatments, and he has still failed. So when he gets up there and he says, the reason why my poll numbers are so low is because of frustration with COVID, by his own standard, that frustration is rightfully directed at him because he used COVID as a political tool. He used it as a wedge to drive Americans apart. And when he got in there, even though he was handed tool after tool developed by President Trump, when he got in there and realized he couldn't shut it down, he tried to deflect responsibility. He tried to blame the American people. He tried to force unconstitutional mandates, all of which haven't worked. The responsibility for the surge lies with Joe Biden, and by his own standard, by his own words, he's unfit to be president for that reason alone.
My key takeaway from that, and get you to react to this, Tommy, is I didn't hear anything that said these major problems, these kitchen table issues that Americans are discussing daily, I didn't hear anything that gave me any degree of confidence that he's going to take any action that would address those and mitigate those to some extent for Americans. Did you?
I didn't. And I think what was a good example, not a good thing that he said, but a good example of this contrast, was imagine sitting around a kitchen table. You're discussing the fact that your grocery bill has skyrocketed, the fact that you can't find a test, you can't go to work because businesses are enforcing this vaccine mandate that Biden is basically encouraging them to enforce. Think about all these issues that people are facing, the crime in cities. And Joe Biden's response to you, as you're sitting there, trying to afford food, energy costs for your family, is that the reason you don't approve of him, and this is what he said yesterday, is because he hasn't had time to take a victory lap. That's his excuse. That's why he's saying that he doesn't have higher approval numbers. So no, the American people can't point to a single thing that he's said or done to show any change of course. In fact, he's doubling down. It's the exact same team he's failed to hold responsible, the exact same failed policies, the exact same agenda he's trying to make even worse than it's been. So unfortunately, like Einstein said, to try something twice and expect different results is the definition of insanity. So it's been a disastrous first year, and unfortunately for the American people, we can expect the same results in the second.
Yeah, I don't think that bodes well for him or the Democrat Party as we approach the midterms. Especially, I've always thought that to a great extent, the price of gas at the pump drives folks' voting reaction in the way they pull that lever, and that doesn't look very good for the rest of the year, based on all of the industry analysts that are predicting $105 a barrel now, right about the time we go to the polls and vote. Doesn't look good.
Yeah, it doesn't. I mean, all he's done is attack American energy. From day one, cancel the Keystone XL pipeline.
Yeah,
since then, it's just
I
been
agree.
worse and worse and worse.
We talked about it in the last segment, leases on federal lands. Tommy, we appreciate you joining us today. Keep up the good fight, and we're going to do our best here as well. Good talking to you. We'll talk soon. Take care.
Hey, thanks for having me. Thank you.